Well, you can go back and review over it.
And again, we can make it quite interactive, and since there's, a few people here, we can engage in any level of discussion
Yeah.
and be more,
That's
I
a
can try to
great thing
answer.
about smaller groups is that.
Yeah, you can
it
really
be
have a
interactive.
lot of input, actually, in a smaller group. Like a focus group. We'll call this a focus group.
Good, like that.
This is part of, there was one meeting that was already held in Bruce for an intro.
So we had a, this is the second public meeting associated with this. We had it here, it was back in June.
Okay.
So that was the first, after doing a lot of assessments and stuff that they had already done, it was the first one to get public comments.
Okay.
And kind of say, hey, are we heading in the right direction? Do you have anything else that we may not be aware of, whether it's in the neighborhood, like a micro situation, or is this, do you know of any big, broad situations that are going on that we need to look at closer associated with water quality? And so from there, we were able to take those public comments, incorporating into what Jacobs has already worked on.
Okay.
And then today's more the results associated with
Okay.
it all. So it's actually a really good one. We will have one more public meeting with the commissioners
Okay.
at that point, so that we can get their input, because ultimately the project is to prioritize funding for doing some water quality projects, is what the goal is. And to have a plan for, find additional money.
'Cause I know the two of you were at the first one, right? But I don't know, did you make the first one?
I did not make it.
Okay. I have a little bit of a review of the goals and things like that, so just to kind of refresh the diluted version, to refresh your memories as well.
We are live, so if you, this is what I can do. Let me just do this at the broadcast. Okay, hello, everybody. Welcome to our second stakeholders meeting. This is for our watershed study that we are doing here. And I'm going to turn it over. We are live, so you should be able to see the broadcast, and we'll go from there.
Okay, great. Go ahead, take it away.
Thank you. Welcome, everyone, and good afternoon. We're here with the Mobile District, Army Corps of Engineers, and Walton County Environmental Services, who is the Army Corps of Engineers non-federal, or otherwise known as local, sponsor. We're here to conduct the second public stakeholder meeting on the current project that we have, Choctawhatchee River and Bay Watershed Assessment and Master Plan Study. And that's being conducted through the Army Corps Public Assistance PAS program. Today we have with us, either in person or virtually, Tanya Harrington, Army Corps of Engineer Mobile District Project Manager, William, otherwise known as Doug Chapin, the Army Corps Mobile District Technical Lead for the contract, Melinda Gates, Environmental Manager for Walton County, is hosting us. Myself, Raymond Cray, Project Manager for Jacobs, Yvette Ratzlaff, Contract Manager for Jacobs, Marcel Dulé, who's there in person, Technical Manager and Civil Engineer for Jacobs, scientific side of things, and Jajit Kaur, scientific for Jacobs as well. So just to give a little bit of a brief intro of what this study is for, is basically we've been working on it for the past 16 months. It's for implementing a watershed assessment and developing a master plan for the Choctawhatchee River and Bay watershed in Walton County, Florida. Study involves assessing impacts from point and non-point source pollution and sediment erosion, and in turn, producing a master plan of prioritized conceptual projects that help reduce potential and primarily arm the county with recommendations on how to implement that. The master plan process, Marcel will go over that in detail with the other areas, but just to give you a comfort level as far as the public being involved, this is, as Melinda said, the second stakeholder meeting. The first was conducted on June 20th of this year, and the purpose for conducting this meeting with you all, the public, is to engage you in the modeling that we've conducted, the pollutant reduction initiatives, and the best management practice projects we're developing for the master plan. Primarily, the purpose is to involve you so that you may contribute things that you know from surface view throughout the county and how you might contribute to the plan. So at that point, I'll turn over the bulk of the presentation over to Marcel to hit things like the project mission, team and schedule, project overview and status, and status updates and project evaluations. Go ahead, take it away, Marcel.
Great.
If I may pause real quick.
Oh, sure.
When we do get to public comments, though, we are going to have the microphone passing around so that we can actually, the people on the boxcast can hear us all. So just as a meeting item.
Thank you, Melinda. So I think we've kind of talked about the project a little bit here for our now intimate audience here, and with Ray's introduction, so I'm gonna, and the team was kind of described here, so I won't go into details of that. But really, what we're trying to do here is we're now approaching this purple area, which is the sixth task here, which is our really working towards the master plan. And you know, we've done 3 tasks so far, which was really related to non-point sources and point sources, and as well as sediment. So those are the kind of the 3, I'm not gonna call them pollutants, but target areas that we're focusing on. And so we've completed those. There's some reports that are available for your reading if you'd like, and we're condensing those down for the final master plan that will sort of summarize those. And the goal is, as Ray was mentioning earlier, is to kind of get that feedback. That first one was like, here's all the data we've collected. This is kind of what we're finding. There's no real concerns, I will say, but there are some areas that do have impairments and that are a little bit elevated. But the good thing is, statistically, we've shown that there are no upward trends. Now, granted, we did acknowledge that there is a lot of growth, and we want to keep it that way, and that's the effort here, is to be proactive, to give the county some recommendations, prioritize some areas where we can make sure that the pristine water quality that we have here, the recreation, the reason why people live here, remains. And so that's kind of where we're at now, is this purple area here, which is the task. And again, the purpose here today is really looking at, and those are the dates, I'll sort of skip that here, but really what we're trying to do is, we have some results. We've identified some kind of target areas as well as projects. So I call them sort of type of projects. We've tested everything, throw everything at the wall, see what sticks. And we find out, you know, a handful of things that you would expect to see in this kind of watershed, what is actually kind of working. And many of you probably already know, and we'd be, you know, curious about your feedback about what of those things would be ideal, would be supported, and or anything new. We'd be happy to entertain new things. So that's kind of the area that we're going to focus on, but that's what we're looking at for this input, is like, are we on the right track? And then if we are, we'll continue to proceed and actually go in and try to identify, which we kind of already have, maybe some spots where we can kind of conceptually design for our master plan a couple of examples. And that's kind of where we're headed. So that's what this task is to do, is really kind of give you a little bit of what we've done before in the past and get some feedback on that. So as you all know, how many of y'all here like have lived here for a really long time here in Choctawhatchee? It's like born and bred almost. Are you new to Choctawhatchee? Choctawhatchee, okay, Choctawhatchee. So, as well as, you know, it's really pristine. I mean, this is really, as you know, some of the best beaches in the country. I think it's got 3 of the best beaches in the country, and so it's really an ideal area. And so what we're trying to do is, the focus of our work is to look at water quality, but from the watershed up, to take a look at loads of pollutants and bacteria and sediment and stuff, and see how that trickles down through the watershed, through all the creeks, and ultimately into the bay. And the bay, we're gonna look at water quality, but also take a look at how that impacts the ecology and aquatic habitat. So that's the trick, is really we have almost 3 models that are gonna kind of link all those things together so that we can make sure that this ecology, the diversity here is maintained in this pristine state. So this is the watershed. If y'all are familiar, it goes all the way up into Alabama. And so the Walton County component here is inside this kind of this purplish area. And you can see how the Choctawhatchee here, Choctawhatchee comes in. Let's call it the river. The river comes in, you know, but it's really spread out, and it crosses county boundaries, it crosses state boundaries, and spills in here over into the east side. But you can see it has other tributaries, right? The Lockwood comes in here, and other smaller tributaries where, you know, Freeport is, and the Finiak. And so we're really focused in on kind of this area, but again, it's this green little area right here that we're kind of focused in right now. Because as a county can't influence, you know, other areas, but hopefully what we're doing now is recommendations that can be totally, you know, implemented in other areas, because the watershed is similar. So big watershed, but we're focusing here in the county boundary of the watershed. So if you're not familiar with it, you know, the majority is forest, you know, so, and then the rest of that is hay and pasture, right? And then a lot of agriculture. And so the rest you can see is, you know, other areas, and the cities really don't even show up. The areas of the cities is fairly small, so let's call it rural, with a lot of, you know, forest and so forth. So the land uses here is, you know, western parts of the Panhandle is very, very typical for the various counties. And so from hydrology, I don't think I need to go over a lot of this, but we're really looking at, and the reason of this picture is we're focusing up from the very top. So from what we call the delineation, right? So this is the delineation right here. So we're really looking at it from where it begins and how it works through essentially the hydrocycle all the way to the bay. Because, you know, we're not going to put a treatment plant in the bay. It's really that upper part of the watershed in which you really start implementing a lot of the BMPs, and as well as would you look at some of these streams and so forth. So that's kind of what we're looking at. Can we put in things that deal with non-point sources, point sources, if you will, and then looking at where we can implement it, where you know, future developments, areas and streets, you know, what are the things that we can do to deal with, in this case, one of them is roads, you know, and some of the new growth with septic tanks. We're going to try to find solutions to kind of minimize any impacts from nutrients, sediment, and bacteria.
Marcel, can
Yes.
I interject one thing just to make sure that everyone understands when we talk about best management practices? It's a term that's used quite often when it comes to stormwater and a lot of these projects that we're talking about here, or otherwise known as BMPs, that they are either structural BMPs where it's a facility that sits at the bottom of an outlet of a stormwater unit or something, or a pond or something that's concentrated, it's a structural unit, or it's actually a practice of what do you do in the watershed. So Marcel, as you're going along, as long as you can attribute to those types of features that I think might be a bit more of an understanding for the public that's understanding what we're talking about.
Yeah, we're gonna, exactly, talk about what, as Ray calls them, BMPs. Sometimes they're called, you know, low impact development, green infrastructure. A lot of these things are what we're gonna be talking about is at the generic level. And like I said, hopefully get some feedback here, that if that's the right track, we'll try to pinpoint some locations where we feel ideal. And we've looked at this already, where we can deploy some of these things. And hopefully that's what some of the grants that the county's gonna try to go after. So again, the goals are really is, you know, we're doing a watershed assessment plan. So we're gonna look at the watershed holistically to try to make recommendations of things that can be pursued that would, you know, enhance water quality, but also, you know, maintain it to its level of, you know, prestige. We've got a class 3 watershed in freshwater marine. So we're gonna try to keep it good. So that's kind of what we're trying to do here. And so again, those 3 reports that are out there, I know those are on the county website, those 3 reports, haven't made available yet. Yeah, but in our master plan, will be in an appendix, so you'll be able to see, this is like, you know, what, 600 pages? I think one of these is you know, it's all the data. You know, we're gonna be very transparent, to say, here's the data we used, and if anybody wants to look at it, they're more than welcome to, but we did comb all the data. I know that you're even responsible a little bit for some of the data collection yourself from the water quality side, so I know that your organization does that. So we did look at that. We looked at a tremendous amount of data from historical, as well as we did some of our own water quality sampling. We did site visits. We did a tremendous amount of data analytics, and we built 3 models to do this. So now this is the point where we're actually showing some of those results. And so our approach, as we talked earlier, you know, is we're going to look at, you know, not only your input, but, you know, we're going to walk through all the way to a master plan. And that's kind of where we stop with the master plan, you know, and then after that, you know, we're going to see if, you know, where we're going to end, and that's where the funding comes forward. You know, hopefully this is some support for things that can be pursued, and that way, hopefully, things can start to get implemented as the county grows. So that's kind of where we're at right there. So, any questions on that? That's kind of an overall picture of the scope of what we're doing, what we've done in the past. I didn't want to start going over a bunch of water quality data like we did last time, and so I'm moving on to the results. But if there's any questions on anything from the past, I'm going to jump into. Yes, go ahead.
I just have a question. I know you said you're focused on Walton County, obviously. Is that just recommendation-wise, or was all of the data collection and sampling done just in the Walton County portion of the watershed?
Yeah, so just for the audience, so the question was, you know, whether or not our sampling and our efforts were focused in on Walton County versus the rest of the watershed. The answer is yeah, we only really focus inside the watershed, so that's why I was showing here on this map. Let me go back to the map, and maybe I'll be more clear on that. So right here, so if you look at it, the watershed is, you know, this bluish area here, and we're inside the county area. So our sampling, data collection, and site visits were focused inside that watershed. Although we do have information from outside the watershed that was publicly available, and our models do extend outside the watershed because we have to have an inclusive model. So we're a little bit less resolution outside the boundary, and we zoomed in and got higher resolution in terms of how we cut the watershed and did all the modeling things inside the watershed or inside the county. So yeah, but there are other people collecting stuff out there, so hopefully down the road in a bigger plan, that watershed-wide, those data could be collected and put together.
But Marcel, would it be fair to say, as far as the parameters that you have at the county boundaries, as the watershed is contributing to the county, you have values, base values at those locations, so you know what you're starting with as you're coming into the county?
Yeah, that's exactly, we call those, yeah, exactly, like boundary conditions. So we do know from other studies and other reports what's coming into the watershed from outside. So, and that's some of the data that we are referencing. Exactly.
Thank you.
Yeah. Yes.
Will the data and the recommendations be shared with all of Washington, Coffee, like all the counties that are at watershed?
The question was, oh, do you want to have, I was going to repeat the question.
Go ahead.
Yeah, the question was, you know, will the data and the results of our work be shared with these adjacent counties?
Yes, so it'll be publicly available, of course. We have a lot, I have a lot of things going on all at one time. This is just one component. The purpose of this particular project was actually to help us as Walton County prioritize projects within our county boundaries. We have also just recently completed a comprehensive conservation and management plan that covers the entire watershed, where we prioritize projects throughout the watershed over a 5-year period to accomplish some good water quality projects as well. There's also another project that I have in works with Army Corps of Engineers to do what's called a general investigation study. That is going to be watershed-wide as well, where we can look at what we call ecosystem restoration projects. So that's building habitat that can also work as water quality, and also improve habitat for endangered species and threatened species. So we've got a lot going on, but yes, all of that will be shared and publicly available. We've got an estuary program that helps facilitate that as well for getting the information out there. So yes, there's lots of partnerships going.
Okay, thank you. All right, so we're going to jump into sort of the results. And what we're trying to do is identify a handful of projects that are, or types of projects that are going to be beneficial to the watershed. And so I have them here in this table. To the left, you see kind of the generic or kind of broader umbrella of the type of project that are going to deal with a certain type of pollutant. And so paving roads was, by far we felt, was one of the top things that can be done. And then we have a grape light model that demonstrates its benefits. So I'll talk a little bit about that. The other one is dealing with septic tanks. Annexing septic tanks. There's a variety of ways that could be done, either annexing them or improving them to more advanced. So a couple of options there. And then looking at sort of this LID, improvements that we can deploy across the watershed, that such as filter strips, green roofs, bioretention, buffer zones, and constructed wetlands. I didn't list that there, but that kind of fits in with this bioretention. And so that's another thing that we're going to be looking at. And then the coastal area. Oh yes, there's a question.
What are filter strips?
I'll show you a picture here in a little bit. This is just kind of the list of what we're going to be talking about here for the rest of the session. And again, I'll be happy to share more than that. And the last one is kind of what I would call these coastal perimeter projects. The oyster reefs and maybe some pocket parks where we can put things there as things discharge directly into the bay. And so those are kind of like geographic specific projects that we're going to be looking at. The living shorelines is a great example. So those are kind of the 5 things that we're going to be talking about, and I'll spend more time on others and then kind of just briefly talk about the others. So those are the 5 we're going to talk about. So road paving, it's not entirely exciting, but clearly beneficial. And so what we're showing here in yellow, right, are the roadways, these little yellow strips here, these little spaghetti strips here. These are the blue is the creeks, and the dark black are roads. And these in yellow are the roads that were identified to cross creeks. And so you can see this right here, you get all, when it comes with a severe rainfall, that dirt just washes off. We've been out there when it's been raining. Melinda, even one time we were out there when we were taking our first field day, it was raining on us, and you could see that chocolatey water pouring along the sides of the ditches, just straight into creeks. And unfortunately, there's a lot of dirt roads here, and I know that the county's very aggressive in their, prioritizing paving. And so that's the idea, is can we localize where that prioritizing of paving can actually occur? And so that's kind of what we did. And so we built what's called a grape light model that actually looks at slopes, terrain, soil type, everything you can think of. Is just a very involved model. And where identified is these sectors of where there's high sediment load. So rather than just try to pick locations, we now have some focused areas where if you were to pave, these are the areas that you want to do. So you see the darker the color is the area you'd want to prioritize paving. And so this is more based on terrain, slope, different types of soil types, and this kind of gives us a little bit more target area. So yeah, rather than just kind of arbitrarily pick it, there's a little bit more focus that the county can say, okay, well, hey, let's try to get anything in there. And then when we follow up with this project, maybe we can identify 1 or 2 roads in there that we could kind of lay out. And so right now we have a typical section here. This is just a classic FDOT example, that a project that I worked on in US 301. And it's just literally just a classic 2-lane road with a little bit of a shoulder and some gutters on the side. So that's, that's about as fancy as it's gonna get here. We're not gonna do, double diamond intersections. But again, if we can find identified locations, this is something that would be very, very beneficial. So any questions on that? Like I said, I'm not gonna spend a lot of time on roads. Yes?
Sorry. New to the whole process, but on that chart where it says kilograms per year,
Yeah.
what is that, kilograms per year per what? Per acre, per mile of road, per?
Yeah, that's good, exactly. Kilograms per year, when you look at it from a watershed perspective, there's like what's called a pour point. So it all drains down, kind of like washing off, and at the very bottom, you don't see it here, but essentially that's the load of kilograms of sediment per year that's washing off, yeah.
Okay.
We run a 2-year model, and so we run the entire storm cycle across the entire year. And then that calculates how much runoff is occurring, and we calculate as it moves down, and we have this is a hydraulic model, and then we just say, this is how many kilograms is coming from that entire watershed. And so it's just a mathematical way of showing that, you need a metric. Yeah, it's hard to envision that. But if anything, and you're right, there's a lot of uncertainty in models as well, but the idea here is based on soil terrain and all these other factors, it at least gives you some idea of what theoretically is high problematic areas. Well, I won't call them problematic, but areas where you're gonna get the most bang for your buck.
So are any of them in the south? It looks like everything is pretty much north of the bay that needs paving.
Exactly, yeah, and that just comes down to a lot of slope is a big driver. As
Yeah.
you're probably more familiar with it in here, that you start getting some slopes as you get away from the bay, and then the terrain gets sandy, and also the soil type and the land use. So you get maybe some forestry, less, maybe even agriculture. You get areas that kind of erode a little easier, and that's probably what happens. So that just jumps out as one of the top ones. So a number of factors, but we could try to maybe explain why watershed 12 is high. Maybe that'd be a little bit.
Yes, water.
You're familiar with it up there, yeah. So,
It is.
and it's probably very sandy up there. Yeah, see, that's the worst case. You get hilly, sandy on the slope. As soon as the rain comes, it'll wash away, and that leads to a lot of the sediment that essentially makes its way into the creeks. Okay, so the other one is septic tanks. Okay, so a couple of ways that we can take a look at septic tanks. So here's a map of the septic tanks in the area. So all the little red dots are kind of septic tanks within the watershed. And the idea is to really, how do we get septic tanks to sewer? Or a way to find maybe an advanced treatment. How can we get it so that anything near a river, near kind of a lake, we kind of pick those up and kind of either connect them to a sewer shed, to an existing wastewater treatment plant. How do we do that? And so we actually are working with the Department of Health and trying to find out new policies to kind of enhance the inspection, try to enhance when you actually install them. So we are working a little bit with that to try to maybe recommend in the report some policies of how to strengthen the installation process as well as the design. Because right now they're pretty standard, but perhaps in this area, given there is a little bit of a TMDL for bacteria, strengthen that a little bit and actually have a post-process, because there's no inspection afterwards, from what I understand. Like, after a septic tank is installed, it could be there for 20 years, and until it fails, that's up to the homeowner. So there is no post-installation process whatsoever. So some policies that we could do to recommend, yes.
Good night.
Oh, Ray, 1 second, there's a question in the audience?
Yeah, are the map, septic tanks, do they include, I'm looking at the south end, are they including just like, the ones, homes that have the lift stations, the sub-lift stations that go to a bigger lift station as well?
If it's in a lift station, if it goes to a lift station, then that's technically not a septic tank.
Okay.
It's,
I was surprised that there's not any septic right there on the south.
yeah, we went over this with the municipalities a little bit. So we've had like, I think 4 versions. I have here a density map here.
Regional utilities.
Yeah, okay.
Yeah, so we've had it, and we're happy to update it.
I trust you. Just surprised.
Well, we have the best we could do with the data, but we did reach out to the utilities. And again, this is a dynamic map of the septic tank density that, there is an update from the utilities. We had most of them involved in the process, and so if there are some spots that, oh no, we picked up that, we picked up this, we obviously would remove that. But there is some concentration of septic tanks in one area, and that's the Finiac. Okay, and so I think that's what we're gonna try to do, is how can we take a look at some conversions in the Finiac area, to try to improve that. So we did pick up some here. Let me just,
And there's a lot right on the bay there.
yeah,
The
yeah.
Chad Holly area,
Yeah, and so there are quite a few. And, we did do sampling in the area, we did pick some elevated numbers, but the bay was actually quite low. It's just due to dilution, and, you get the aeration by the time you get the water down. But there were some spots that we did pick up at the north. But, so just to demonstrate a little bit here, it is a little bit of a concern. So there is some impairments. And so the impairments for nutrients, right, is these purple areas. So you can see Alaqua is right here, or Alaqua. I'm gonna record that and play it on the way home for an hour. But you can sort of see the purple areas demonstrating that's an impairment. So that's not necessarily meeting criteria. There's no TMDL in place, as we know, but it does start showing that there is some elevated values. That hasn't required corrective action, but that's what we're trying to do is get after this. And same thing for bacteria. So there's no TMDL as far as we know, but there is some, there is no trend going up, but these are the kind of things that we want to address. But as far as I know, and we looked into this, a typical TMDL has a loading value that you're supposed to reduce to, but for whatever reason, the EPA, and we did follow through with this, there is no loading on this TMDL in the watershed. And EPA, we called them, and they say it's a legacy document. They even couldn't give us a clear answer on that either. So there is no delisting per se that needs to be done. Yes.
Marcel, could you give a brief understanding of TMDL to everyone so everyone's on the same page?
Were you looking at the audience, Ray, on the camera when he raised his hand, the gentleman there? He asked that very question. A TMDL is a total maximum daily load. And the way that's calculated is that there's a concentration, let's call it 126 milligrams, but counts per mil, which that's what it is. And they multiply that times the flow, and it gives you a load. And so they look at all the factors that go into calculating that comes into it, what's called a source. And they say, okay, based on the criteria for retaining a certain use of the water, in this case it's pristine water for swimming and recreation, it has to hit a certain limit, and so they give you a value. And so everybody's trying to hit that value mathematically. So it's just a mathematical term, really.
Also, just to
And
let you know.
just to support what you're saying is that part of what we did as well is looked into information on TMDLs from EPA perspective, so we can understand what the loading is permitted in the areas.
Exactly. So that's each watershed is unique, and so based on the watershed, you have to calculate that number. So there's no what's called a concentration. Concentration is in milligrams per liter, so that's just generic. But based on the flow, it gives you an actual load. That's a real number, and they try to hit that number with all mixing everything else that comes into it, from wildlife, birds, you name it, goes into that. So hopefully that works.
Also, because it's an established value, it has to maintain, I think it's a 3-year consecutive level at that point for it to be deemed that label of being a TMDL for the area as it being impaired. Okay, So the levels here, that's TMDL,
Yeah.
but for it to be impaired, it has to be at 3 years at, above that level to say that particular.
You got some bad weeks or bad
You,
months.
you can, yeah, you can have spot checks, like, you know, we had a bad flood and all of a sudden all this stuff came down, but that's a situational situation versus a long-term, we have an impairment, so.
So, perfect segue to the next slide.
Yes, sir.
There it is right there on the screen. So you can see this is Alakwa, which is almost all of them are very good. There's very few, what I would say, areas that have a lot of elevated values from all the data that we collected. But, there's like one or two. So this is by far the worst one. Everything else is below the threshold, let's say. So you can see here, and this is why it's impaired. You can see the values. This is the actual sampling data for over, 5 years now. And the dashed line is the criteria, 126 milligrams per, or 126 counts per 100 mil. That's the value, and you could see it, it's just ticked above it for more than 3 years. And so that's why you have the TMDL. But as I mentioned earlier, there is no trend going up. It's just kind of constantly there. And then the black line is what's called a 10% 30-day max. And so in theory, you're not supposed to have more than 10% of the samples above 410. And so that's the second criteria. So you're either, you can get delisted or impaired for two reasons. And so here we only got one. You're over the 126 and you're ticking over the 410. You can sort of see here's the percentage. So this is how many samples were over that 410 per year, which is not accurate. I'll just make sure I say that. It's a 30-day sampling. So we don't have 10 samples per month. So technically you cannot fulfill that criteria because it doesn't fulfill the actual water quality standard sampling protocol. But just for example, I did some of them per year, and you can see, a couple of years, you're at, here clearly pretty high. You can see them right here, right? And then it's below in 2018. You can see it's below that 410, and then so back and forth. So on average, 20% of the samples are over the 410. So not alarming, but this is what we want to work on.
I'm just kind of curious, and I'll probably ask you
Oh, no, by all means.
what's the difference between 2017 and 2018? What happened to make that so different? Do you have any idea?
There I rely on the stakeholders to see if there's anything from the development spike, is there anything that would have caused a spike where you would have had maybe bad developments
Or-
that got
Or
addressed?
actually, that looks like a lowering. I mean,
It is a lowering.
2017, it was really
I would
high.
say I mean, the first thing I would look at always is rainfall. Like,
Yeah, there's, and that's why you do the load.
excessive and intense rainfall.
Right. And that's why you have wet weather versus dry weather, and that's why you do the load, because you can't just look at concentration. Rain induced,
Rainfall.
Yeah.
'cause-
Yeah.
yeah.
right, because they sample on certain days, and if it's raining or not raining, you have high flow, low flow, and actually, I was just attending at a conference, and this is one of the recommendations from the industry, is that there is a one-size-fit-all sampling protocol and standard. And there's a real distinct difference between wet weather and dry weather. And so they're trying to, the engineering industry is trying to say, well, can we separate high rainfall events, sampling versus dry weather, because you're gonna get big spikes that aren't necessarily here all the time. And so there needs to be a little bit more robust standards that EPA needs to push forward that would account for the different criteria that you would see under different, flow conditions. But right now, we don't have that.
I just want to say, we did a small, short-term study in Valparaiso with microbial source tracking. And so we deliberately did wet and dry times. And so in dry times, the source is birds. There's bacteria there. And
Avian.
It's always birds.
Yeah.
It's always avian.
Yeah.
And then in the wet times, then you see dog and human. So
Right.
from the stormwater runoff.
Yeah. Yeah, pets, especially in urban areas, pets and cats by far are the number one bacteria source. When you do DNA source tracking, by far.
We didn't do any cat tracking, it was just dogs.
Cats are
We
hard
have
to
money
find the
do
scats for
as
cats,
well,
yeah.
but we did dogs and humans.
Cats are a little bit more, I guess anyways, you know how cats are, so they're a little bit more elusive. But anyway, so you can see a little bit of elevation there, and again, that's, Lacqua's the worst, let's call it the worst, is the one that has the highest exceedances, so. And so what we're trying to do here is, and this is the FINIAC, we've identified a handful of spots where we think they're near enough collection systems, they're near enough lift stations, where we see these spots right here is where we can have some targeted extensions of sewer system into these neighborhoods to capture these septic tanks. And so we did look at these, and I think that's something that we could do, or in some other areas, we could do some advanced septic tank replacements. So these are some areas that we're thinking about, and so if anybody y'all live in this neighborhood, before you get some feedback, but that's the idea, are there areas that are near enough a collection system that we can extend out and capture them? And that's the idea. Yes?
I can't speak to the Phoenix Springs, but certainly in Choctawhatchee County, where regional is the utility to provide sewer, the impact fee is, if you're someone that's been on septic, on the septic tank for a long time, the impact fee is like almost $8,000 to get onto sewer water. So that's probably a huge impediment to anyone that's not, really wealthy, to make that transition. So they need some grants or something like that.
Yeah, absolutely.
Some sort of incentive program for people to switch.
Oh, I know, and that comes up all the time, because when you, essentially, if a sewer system is running in front of your neighborhood, you have to connect, and guess what, you gotta pay, and so that doesn't, unfortunately, and I know that there's sometimes we can get some leveraging, because if it can do the entire street, and the challenge with septic tanks, here's the real challenge with septic tanks, is that, you're not paying into like a traditional development where there is wastewater, that is paid for by the developer on day one, and then the city takes it over. And then people paying their bills are paying into the capitalization of that replacement over time. And so you're paying a little bit, right? So if you have a septic tank, technically you've never paid into that fund, and therefore you're not gonna get a sewer system. So if it is placed, it's subsidized by ratepayers. And so that is the dilemma, other than getting grants, like you're saying, is like a one-time deal, or you just pay for it out of your pocket.
And I can tell you, so I've applied for 319 grants, which is it's a water quality grant through the Florida Department of Environmental Protection, delegated down from EPA. We did one on the coastal dune lakes. We identified, I think it was around 65 lots that were still on septic, and we were able to convert, I think it was around 41 of those lots to sewer by subsidizing that.
Yeah.
So in lieu of the $8,000 that you just quoted, it was, I think, $350. So which was much more, yes, it makes a lot more palatable. Unfortunately, I still encountered some resistance on those remaining lots that didn't want to join the party at the end of the day, so.
Melinda, we're having some great conversations here. Maybe I should switch to this microphone since, and if Ray and them want to do it, I can tip in that way to the audience, because I don't think it's being picked up with the audience commentary. Do we wanna,
We can definitely.
you wanna do that? What do you, just take turns of,
Yes.
and I'll switch to, sorry, Ray, I'm gonna take the microphone off the computer and I'm gonna talk off this mic so y'all hear me. There we go. And so if you need to say, I'll just drop the mic so that, because this is great conversation. Okay, so the idea is here again to try to figure out how to pick up these locations either through a wastewater treatment plant expansion, lift tanks, and so forth. So that's the idea, is how do we get how do we get that there? So there's a couple of ways that we typically do. If an area is low, like in Sandestina here next to the bay, so we're gonna have to actually, the household will have here you can see right here what's called a grinder pump, and that's what you may have alluded to earlier, is you pump it down at the house and send it to another lift station or to another collection system. And so that can happen, and that you would kind of backfill the septic tank and then replace the leaching field and fill that, and then the tank itself would get replaced with this kind of grinder pump system. And then again, obviously, we can just run sewer to the local regional area. So that's one way to do it. Another way here is, I didn't show a picture of it, but we have sort of these advanced systems too, so we could definitely do that. And that's kind of the replacement. So that's kind of a picture here. These are a little bit more elaborate, a little costly, obviously, but in areas where perhaps where you could put it in maybe a small commercial area or something like that, that could be funded. But a little bit more elaborate, a little bit more involved, but that's one option too. Some of the larger houses, as they get built, the developers would have to pick that up, but that's definitely an option. Where it's not possible to connect, you would do something along these lines, and these are called advanced systems. And so that's kind of one of the other recommendations too. And so the results. So we did run some models here in the Definiak area, and so we just kind of ran some generic ideas, which are just completely hypothetical. But if we were, say, in those little areas, and we were to produce in the Definiak area by 50%, right, in those subbasins that I showed you earlier. So this is kind of the bacteria, which are essentially the counts per 100 mil that are coming off of those areas. And by installing or reducing those septic tanks by that much, you can see the reduction. So a 50% reduction in the septic tanks, right, came out to a 69% reduction in the annual loads. And if we can get rid of all this, and this is just a hypothetical, this is our, our extremes, what if there were no septic tanks? We just ran this crazy one. You can see it's a massive reduction in septic tanks, and this is, again, hypothetical, unrealistic, but you can see that septic tanks do impact the watershed, and if they could be addressed in the long term, you would have benefits. So again, it's just a proof of concept to demonstrate that there is some impact from septic tanks related to bacteria.
It's just kind of interesting to hear that, because recently, and I don't know if it was approved or not, but there was an application for a development, I believe it was north of the bay, and they were going to put in septic. Do you remember that? I believe so. I don't know whatever happened to it, but do you all comment on things like that?
Well, we can look at specific developments that are proposing, whatever they're doing in their development. They're following health standards and county standards, so there's not much we could say. The only thing we could do is perhaps ways to incentivize these more advanced programs and recommend policies that would say, if you're in this soil type, in this area, you can't have this type whatever, you have to go to this advanced septic tank system that would have these treatment trains, and there would be requirements. But that's health code change, and I think the health department is now, I think in this county, is it switching to the state, I think? Yeah, see, so there's a little bit of changing there, changing of the guard, and maybe that's something that could be looked into. At least we could recommend something like that. But I know, like here in the area I know by Freeport, there's, the houses have to be on an acre. So you're getting larger acreages with smaller houses, so that, doesn't have as much density in areas that would have septic tanks. So that's something that, is something to consider, so. Okay, any questions? That's septic tanks. I'm gonna move on to the second one. We're actually on the third now. So here's a picture. This is, oh, hold on, Ray.
I did have a question or something that you might be able to point out is the effort with that is also tied into what would be done at the plants themselves or extended plants or improvements to plants that might drive reduction of septics. What intersection of that effort can you demonstrate as far as the communication with utility companies?
Yes, we did talk with the utility companies about their current projects, their capital improvement plans, to see if there's any intentions to improve or expand their plants. I know that, I guess Freeport, when we were there, they were actually about to complete one of their plants. And the gentleman that was running it was telling us that the day that the plant goes online, it's already too small. So there are efforts to expand the treatment plants. I know that in Definiac there was talk of that. And so as those plants do grow, those are the opportunities to extend the collection system out to capture those areas. And I'm sure that some of the cities hopefully are aggressive in attacking that, but it comes down to the funds to extend out a system is very costly, and is there a return on investment for capturing those rates? And those are, the managers of each one of the utilities that have to make those kind of decisions. But clearly, we would recommend that. And whether or not there's grants available, that's what we're going to recommend, and hopefully that there could be some matching or something along those lines. But yeah, there are opportunities to expand the plants, for sure, to get some of these septic tanks out. That because in the previous presentation we made, we showed that about 50% of the residential properties here are on septic. So it's a lot.
Yeah, and I just wanted to demonstrate for the purposes of what we're doing with this study that we did look at it from that perspective so that the two efforts do meet as far as recommendations go. So thank you, Marcel.
Yes, no, thank you, Ray. Exactly. So many ways to skin the cat. And so, anything is on the table, really, is to just get septic tanks, and especially the older ones. I know that south of the bay, there's a lot of older ones to try to get those replaced. So the other one is what we call sort of the green infrastructure, which is looking at stopping the water or the polluted water from getting off the land into the rivers. So this is a series of BMPs that are, green. So we're looking at repairing corridors, looking at buffer strips, filters. So when you ask me that question, here they are. This is a very nice picture of showing you a tremendous amount of techniques you have kind of like, you let the grass grow a little bit thicker. So running off of a farm here or an agricultural area, you get these strips that kind of impede the water before it runs off and gives you a strip of like, say, at least 25 feet, where that pollutant is landing in the vegetation and it being absorbed by the soil. And that's the idea. And especially if you have trees and everything, the more the obstacle, the better. And so that's what we're trying to do, is can we get these filter strips? There's many different names of doing that. And so we did look at that and see how can we deploy these in particular areas. And now I'm going to take a look at Alakwa here. And we did look at this, and so that's actually was quite beneficial. These are very effective at reducing pollutants that are running off of the land. So here we're looking at it as it comes off the land, as it enters the creek. And I apologize for the very modelly looking thing, but that's the idea. Is we're looking at the water that's coming off of the watershed and landing inside these creeks as it makes its way to the bay. So the bay's right over here. And so the idea is, can we do this? And these are actually quite, these aren't, costly, but sometimes they're on private property, so a little bit difficult to implement sometimes, but very effective. So that's the challenge, is you don't have a lot of public land, on people's property, so that's kind of a real challenge. So really just kind of work with citizens to try to do that. Yes?
Looking at Alakwa, where you were just pointing out, how much of that is private? Isn't a lot of that on ADJOURN?
That's a good question. I didn't plot that, but that may be so, yeah. So we don't have the base engaged with right now with us as a stakeholder, but we could definitely reach out to them, yeah.
Yeah, I would, yeah, definitely.
Yeah. Perhaps the Army Corps folks can support us and help us out with that, but they are a big contributor. But they don't have a lot of development. I know they have a lot of land, but
right.
Buffer strips.
Which is good,
Yeah.
yeah.
Because they could just order it.
Right.
The commander could just order it, so for
Exactly.
sure, yeah.
Thanks.
That's a good point. Let me jot that one down. Exactly. So that's the idea, is can we do that? So again, without getting into too much details, and also I think I have some pictures here. I didn't bring in some pictures here. I'll do that next time. But it's really, so I looked at these BMP types at different land use types. So I looked at rangelands, or my team looked at rangelands. We looked at applying it at forests and then urban areas. And so you could look at the reduction of nutrients. And what we call nutrients is nitrogen, phosphorus. Those are the key nutrients of concern, because they allow, they kind of cause algal growth. And we don't want algal growth, because then that creates dissolved oxygen problems. And so nutrients is not a good thing. So, and you can see here when you look at rangelands, so you can see the reduction. So watershed 48, let's go look at that. So that's just right here in this particular watershed. So 48 seemed to be one of the ones that had the better reduction. Again, it was one of the lower amounts of nitrogen as a whole. But you can see, you're getting 10 to, here 30, 30, 30, 10. So urban area wasn't effective. So rather than look at all these numbers, it's just telling us that certain BMPs are more effective in certain land use types, okay? And so really, I don't want you to look at this as a crazy looking table, but it really is, you get in sediment reduction, 30%, and it's a little bit better in rangeland versus forest land. So what we're gonna do in our report is kind of recommend, this is the better area to do this kind of filter strip. This is better to do some kind of bioretention. This is area. So our report will be more specific, but we're just demonstrating that we are seeing some good results in terms of reduction by deploying these kinds of strategies in the watershed. So again, this is just looking at feedback. Are we making sense? Is this good? Should we proceed? That's kind of the feedback that we're asking for. And so we did look at green roofs. That's something that was on the table. It's something we can model. And so it didn't have I'm not gonna say it was not effective, but it is kind of an interesting idea. But we always see these things as people want to propose them, but they're so hard to maintain. The amount of rainfall that you get here, so we don't want to be. And the only reason I put this here is because we don't want to get too crazy on some of our recommendations. We want to really just recommend things that are more likely to happen here. And so this one, even though people like this stuff, you don't have the density here in the climate, I think, for something like this. So I just kind of throw that in there. All right, any questions on kind of the buffer strips, which is really an impediment for pollutants to leave the watershed to enter the creek? That's kind of that strategy.
My body language is indicating that. So
I mean, in agricultural lands or like in that picture you show there, I mean, wouldn't one of the primary pollutants you're trying to avoid getting in the watershed be something like an herbicide? Or
Yeah,
like
that's essentially what nutrients are. They're nitrogen. They're nitrogen-based. So, or herbicides or pesticides.
Yeah.
So we're looking more at the nitrogen and phosphorus, which is
Okay.
like fertilizers, and also just the organic material that just ends up on the farm itself, spilling off. And if there's a livestock, that's another one too.
So, yeah, I guess in the measure of success here for the watershed, are we measuring for chemicals, or are we just really measuring for things that would feed algae and bacteria?
That nutrients, exactly.
Nutrients,
So
okay.
there are, as far as I understand, impairments for certain chemicals. I think one metal popped its head up a little bit, but
Mercury.
yeah, is the only thing that popped up. So there's not really a lot of non-nutrient pollutants that we're looking into.
Okay.
But these measures, these BMPs do deal with a lot of things that are related to any kind of what I call runoff pollutants from roads and, urban areas and commercial sectors. So you would deal with it, but there's not a lot of that here either,
Okay.
Marcel, can you comment on what you found as far as like a resident condition in the bay? Are you finding a low DO level, dissolved oxygen level, or you finding conditions that are, just for starters, difficult to deal with?
We didn't have a lot of DO. The previous presentation, we made some DO. There are some impairments for DO. It is, because DO is not a pollutant, it's an indicator. So that just tells you that you do have high nutrients, which is leading to algae, which is leading to die-off, which is consuming in an anaerobic process, and that kills the DO. And so that DO is seasonal. And so we do have a lot of data on DO. I'll make a point to talk about DO in the report to demonstrate meeting the criteria. But as far as I know, there's not fish kills and fish die-offs from bad DO that you would normally see in some dead watersheds, because they get stagnant. I haven't seen that, but that's definitely something that we can address. But we're not looking at that particularly in terms of a criteria per se. But it is related to the ecology, and it is related to aquatic life. So it is a parameter that we have a ton of data on. Luckily, that's sampled regularly. It doesn't require a lot, and so that we are capturing that. Okay, so we're kind of just end on this one. We're kind of running on time here. And so again, I'm here for as long as y'all want, but I do want to respect the time for the event. And so I'll spend a little less time on these. And what I want to talk about this last one, these are more the geographic ones. These are kind of the ones that are on the perimeter, looking at over, I think this was in Panama City, and we have one over here too. These kind of reefs, these natural, or not natural, but constructed reefs that allow for kind of growth for oysters and other shellfish that kind of filter the water, and that improves a lot of sediment uptake, nutrients, and so forth. And so we want to do that a lot if we can. I know that we want to talk with you, Melinda, to see if there's an ideal location where we can put that. That one was difficult to model, unfortunately, because it is such a small perimeter. In the scale of what we're operating on, I don't have a lot of good results, although we will try to see if we can figure something out to look at a very specific area. But I know they are beneficial. The literature definitely says they're beneficial. And so we're going to try to see if we can kind of sharpen our model a little bit to show that those are beneficial in a certain way. And actually, we talked about maybe even a biological, what was it, a coastal model you mentioned earlier while we were having lunch? That can actually look at some of the more the aquatic side of the benefit of this in particular. So, but we'll try to do a little bit. That's one I wish I had a finding that was a little bit more solid on that one.
So we're participating right now in a panhandle-wide study on constructed living shorelines. It's a pretty intensive study.
Oh, nice.
In the St. Andrews, St. Joe Bay Estuary Program is
Okay.
running it, and so there will be some data
Oh, great.
generated. We've been sampling for about a year now.
Okay.
This first year is just over, so there will be some data generated about the benefits of living shorelines,
Do you know when
just here locally.
when the date that will be available?
So I asked, I need this data really badly, so I was asking just recently, and they're like, oh, it's not ready, not ready for prime time yet, but I can make that connection for you.
We could follow up and see.
Just follow up and when they are ready.
Okay, and what we'll try to do is that we're just trying to show evidence that things are working, and even if that there's some indication that these projects are ongoing, I just want to try to find a way to model it in a condition where I'm showing benefits, and that's something I'm trying to work on. And right now, it's so small that it just doesn't show up.
There's
yes, there's a living shoreline suitability model.
Okay, I think that's the one you were mentioning, yeah.
Yes,
Yeah.
there is.
Yeah.
And also, I would perhaps make as part of a recommendation to have, a donor marsh or a plant supply, because that is gonna be a limiting factor for a lot of these, planting projects. Right now, all around the Gulf Coast, plants are, for restoration, are in short supply.
Okay. Yeah. Thank you. So, in summary, I think, we could take a look at as much as we can. We have identified some categories that are gonna deal with the pollutant discharges, right? Obviously, the watershed is very complex. Point sources aren't as prevalent as you would think. It's mostly non-point sources. Although the septic tanks are ones that we could, aren't technically a point source, but we deal with them as a point source because you can actually find them. I mean, the map is a bunch of points, right? So we're gonna look at some areas of interest, the bay, obviously. And so we're gonna try to do the best we can. And so I wanted to show you a little bit of some findings here. You can sort of see the reductions here. This is Alacqua again, so you can sort of see the percent reductions in nitrogen, phosphorus, and sediment. So you're seeing good results. We kind of just ran all those BMPs together, and you could just sort of see you're getting some decent reduction there. And now I want to show you the bay. So all that was the watershed, right? And so I'm just going to cycle through a bunch of presentations here, and just these are these color-coded maps, and you can sort of see. Remember, we're trying to go from the watershed at the very top, at pretty much residential areas, into the creeks, ultimately to the bay. And so this is just a time series, and what I'm just saying, I just capture, with the maps I'm about to show you, we just capture a snapshot in time and show you the difference of that across the entire bay. So this is for nitrogen. And so what you're seeing here is, this is the base case in the bottom, right? And this is the concentration of nitrogen in the bay at a snapshot in time. So if I were to come over here and just cut it, this is what I'm doing. It's just a particular concentration, and this, I'm not gonna say it's arbitrary. We could pick seasons, we could pick, rain events, whatever. We can choose a time to show what that reduction is. And so this is a 10% reduction in nitrogen from the rivers and the watersheds pouring at the perimeter of the bay. So that's why you see this model is just this black model that's right here, right? And so that is what's coming in, pouring in at points or on the perimeter of nitrogen. That is the loading source that comes into the bay. And then this model is run for, I think, several months, right? And then it mixes and does its thing, the hydrodynamic model, and I think these models take like a day to run, and these are the results. And so you can see here the nitrogen concentration, and just with a 10% reduction of the loading coming into the bay, you can see the reduction, right? This is the average of the milligrams per liter of nitrogen. So you can see these green spots, right? This has gone away. So just with a 10% reduction, you see quite a bit of benefit in the nitrogen that is kind of spread out throughout the bay. We ran 25%, so you can see that green really starting to go away. And then obviously 50%, which is, that's our cap. I don't know if we'll ever get there, but you can see quite a bit of reduction compared to what was seen there before. And you can see in the bays here, green, and the Alacqua here, blue now. So you see quite a bit of benefit. See, so, and then we were talking about earlier, about the causeway. You can see the impact of the causeway on the bay, really truncating and limiting flow as it goes in, so it kind of stops that mixing as you go across. So, the model is, I'm not gonna say it's calibrated, but we have validated as best we can with various points. And we feel it's pretty good. And the idea here is it moving the needle? That's about as much as we can really answer with this study. Is it moving the needle? And we say yes. It clearly is. Even with just a modest 10%, clearly there is obvious improvements there in the bay. And so I'll go to phosphorus now. So again, similar, 10% reduction. Not too much phosphorus in here, but you do see some red spots right in here, See that red spot right there along the perimeter? It's going away. And there's 50%. So free for your phosphorus. We'll go through that again. There's 10%, 20, 50%. And then we'll go to bacteria. So bacteria is interesting because although you get bacteria in the rivers and creeks, remember bacteria outside the human body lasts 3 days. You know, it doesn't live long outside a warm-blooded body, right? So by the time it gets down to the bay, it's been out for a while, and so you don't see this big plume as it lasts all the way through, because as this bay goes back and forth, it just kind of dies off. So there's a high decay factor. So that's why you only see, the bacteria coming in here at this concentration, 16 counts per 100, right in through here and right in through here. It dies off pretty quick, So if there were high concentrations here, you wouldn't want to be swimming, in this area right here, which is, one of the higher recreational areas in the bay, right? So we do want to do an improvement on that. And you can see here, this was, I think, 50% reduction. So there goes down from like, above 16 to just a little green. So it's cutting it in half, And then this is a little bit backwards. Yes?
On your map, I'm just trying to make sense of it, because when I look at, I was at where the causeway is, and it doesn't make sense to my memory of the bay, but where you're seeing that point source come out, like, to me, that is like fully in the mouth delta. You're not?
This is the mouth right here, yeah.
So, are you guys not are you trying to figure out how that's represented as a map? Because that's mostly the area where the point source is, where the red is like fully in, up in the river delta, like Mitchell River or something like that.
Yeah, we have we go a little bit into the river.
Okay.
There's a certain amount of depth where the model just cuts off. After
Okay.
a while, it's just no longer, quote, a bay. So we do go in a little bit.
Is it counting the whole delta as an estuary as a body of water?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
So
yes.
it doesn't divide, in the delta, it's not dividing the particular channels. Sorry.
The way that it's
see what
cut.
I mean?
No. And I can show an area. No, the way
Yeah.
that it's cut, you don't see this here, but it's cut into little tiny cells. So it's essentially what's called a raster. And so you're looking at cells that are essentially little cubes that, all the calculations are occurring in. And so
Right.
that's what you're seeing is it's essentially a big grid of Lego blocks that, and we come a little bit higher because it's deep. This is actually pretty good size here in this area. And there comes a point where we just kind of cut it off. And so we do have, this is just one large, / estuary and bay area.
Okay.
And the hydrodynamics take that into account.
So, right, if that is, on the map, if it's wooded wetlands where water can flow freely through them, you're not demarking that area. I'm just trying to understand the map, because it's
Yeah,
not
a wooded
navigable.
wetland we
Yeah.
wouldn't have. This is purely, if you look at it, it's here, the nitrogen map. So you can sort of see it here. Our
Sure.
model only is to the black perimeter, which is the edge
Sure.
of the coastline.
Sure.
Yeah.
Dirt, not grass that's
No,
wetlands.
no,
Okay.
not at all.
That
no.
helps me understand.
And the only thing you'd see here a little bit is that we do go a little bit into the creek, so long as there's sufficient depth for it to be, quote,
Right,
estuary and bay.
okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, by that map, it looks like there's a whole bunch of water.
Yeah,
And
that's the
really,
delta.
it has a lot of vegetation in
Yeah.
the area.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah. And this is based on, there's a threshold, we're modelers, right? So we just take a LiDAR map, which is essentially a DTM, which is just essentially an elevation file of points. And then there's an elevation where we cut it off, and then that builds the model. I mean, I don't want to get into a bunch of details of modeling, but yeah, there's a threshold that demarks what's called the bay. Don't fall.
What's feeding your hydrodynamic model? Where are you getting that? The hydrodynamic portion of your model?
The model is built in Mike Plus, and so we bring in offshore flow data from, and this is my colleague with a PhD, Sei Chang, who builds, essentially it comes out from an offshore model. It's got wind, it's got all kinds of things, rainfall, and it's essentially built on a grid that brings into account a tremendous amount of factors. And so I don't know how much detail you want to get into a Mike Plus model, but
I don't want to get into a lot of detail, no.
to find out different
I
solving.
just know that there's not a lot of real-time data being generated on the hydrodynamics inside the bay. So he's modeling it from other information, I guess.
He's bringing in, this is, if you look at this is cut, like on 50-meter grid. So this is not like a little dinky model. This is, if you would actually look into it, this model takes little tiny cells and cubes, and it's a finite difference solving solution that takes that as a reactor and water moves in and out of this little cube, and it brings in water quality parameters, causes a reaction, and then moves on. And it's actually solving. That's why this model takes on a supercomputer, it takes like 6 hours to solve. And it's calculating all those coefficients, all those reactions, all the movement of water, and it is loading it with weather, temperature, all that good stuff. And then what's coming in is you take into account the bay kinematics, but then we're loading it with the river loadings. And that's what's coming in at these points, is that we actually bring in water flow as a stream into the boundary of the bay. And that's the pollutant loading that's coming in that gets reacted as a, like, call it a bathtub effect. And there is a model called bathtub, and that's essentially one reactor. This one has got like 5 million little reactors.
But I think I figured it out on my map. One of the maps you showed with, there was the tributary on the right, almost the far right side of the map. It was to the left of that one, the west of that one, that one. It was showing a high concentration. I think it was.
Oh, this was the bacteria one. Yeah.
Yeah, right there. So that's the river.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah. See the little, I guess I should label this. This is like,
Yeah.
this is raw model outputs. So
But
make a note to, note to self.
It's confusing because
better
like to
map.
get to that point where you're showing like that water coming out,
Yeah.
that's like a 20-minute ride in a boat from what is the mouth, the de facto mouth, or the actual mouth, like where you leave the bay
Right.
as a navigable body of water and get into the estuary. That point that is shown,
This one?
no, below that, where it, yeah, right there.
Yeah.
That's fully in the river, but that's like a 15 or 20-minute ride in a boat, motorboat, from the mouth of the actual bay.
Oh,
Up
so you're
into the
saying,
river.
oh, okay, so you're saying this is like, a little bit in compared to where the bay actually ends. So you're saying.
Yeah, like the actual bay in the way that it is experienced by, like open or navigable water is far west of there. Like the actual east end of the bay is far west of there.
Okay, well, let me,
Like
well, that's a
about
good.
the 50, between 585 and 590, I think is where I would
Okay.
put it.
Then let me, that's a good comment. What I'll do is, I'll try to, for the next exhibit, remember, these are, we're getting started here producing outputs. So what I'll do for the next one is overlay this very map on an aerial photograph.
Yeah.
And then that
Yeah.
will probably, help out, yeah.
Yeah, I don't know that it has any effect on the results or, efficacy of the model, but in terms of me like trying to recognize my backyard, it's tough.
Do you live in the
Yeah.
red? I hope you don't live in the red.
Yeah.
Do you live in the red? Do you boat here?
Yeah.
Yeah, so
Yeah.
I'll definitely, and now that I know, remember, this is just a raw output. In the future, what I'll probably do is, like, I don't really need all this over here, so what I'll probably do is zoom in here and drop it on top of an aerial photograph. That's definitely what I'll do. So, I think we ran a little bit over on time, but I think it's probably okay. We could take a break, and, I think we've had good discussion. So the next part is public comment period, so, whatever y'all want to do. Yeah, if you want to take a break, whatever, we could, I just have some follow-up comments, follow-up steps that are next, that's all.
Whatever you, okay. We can take a couple minutes, like, be
Yeah.
stepping out and take a little breather.
Sounds good.
Yeah. Would you get back to that? You have to check. Have to bet my thing over. I'm curious.
And it's true, and I did get the TIFF files available. Do I dare try to pull them up right now? Because it would load, they're like 100 megabytes.
You know, there's some people that, at least certain.
Oh, we should probably, yeah, turn off. back from our break. So I guess we want to begin the public comment period. I know we've had a lot already, so if there's any other closing thoughts or?
Just wait for the mic. Did you want to first?
I'll go after you.
Okay. And I can't remember where I saw this. It was part of some other comprehensive plan or land development code in another county. And part of it addressed using pesticides and herbicides, I believe, in areas that are more environmentally sensitive. Let's say 100 feet from whatever that buffer would be from either a bay or. Would that be something that maybe would be recommended by this group? Or would that be, I love that we have the coastal protection zones and the 50 feet buffer. You can't put your house and you can't cut down vegetation within, that's all really great for pulling out those non-point, pollutants. But I was just wondering if we could go a little further and say, if you've got a house or yard right on the bay, don't use these herbicides, don't use these pesticides. Is that something that's even possible?
Oh, absolutely. I think there's, as I know, we're trying to come up with 5 specific projects that we can kind of lay out and put the cost estimates. But we could definitely put together a list of things that are good ideas for sure. We talked about just the generic section of things that could be deployed that we won't necessarily model, like public education is one that you don't model, but things like that could be a list, and we have a lot of material on that we could definitely include in the report of just good ideas and recommendations beyond those 5 specific projects that we're going to talk about. We could definitely do that.
If I could also just follow up, we're going through the comprehensive plan reviews and stuff. Have you offered that suggestion in any other meetings yet?
It really just occurred to me.
Okay.
I remembered something that I had heard some time ago.
Okay.
and,
Since we're kind of coming to a close on that, I think the intent is to be finished at some part of the first of next year on the comp plan. Maybe that's something that, go ahead and write our planning department, our planning director, Matt Carpenter, and see if we can get maybe those thoughts brought into it at the same time, copy me on it, and because when it comes down to pesticides and fertilizers and stuff, you can put in fertilizer ordinances into your code.
That's what I was wondering, is it possible?
It is possible. There are other communities that have it. There are some logistical sides of that are a little bit more complicated when it comes to the compliance, because it requires a lot of testing and all those things. So maybe through some good research, we can find some reasonable ways of maybe encouraging people to use less fertilizer and pesticides on their properties. And I think that's a great idea. And the monitoring of it, you're right, is really almost impossible. But if you have it as part of your comprehensive plan, at least it's there. And somebody's got it and maybe in their head. And if they decide not to use it, you can't, go around everybody's yard and see what they're doing and monitoring it. But
At least it's out there as.
something we attempt to do, so.
Or like you're not having like runoff monitoring for every one specific address, but say if the CBA was having really low DO readings in a certain part of the bay, you could do some sort of public education, or just a mailer, like, hey, if you're on a mosquito control district runoff, or if you're on the bay or whatever, then maybe you should think about what you're using in your lawn, because we're having influences that are affecting the ecology of the bay, or something like that. I don't know. This is really cool. I was hoping to make it to the last meeting. It's very heartening to see this work being done, and I'm glad that I was able to make it to this one. The only question I had was about the mosquito control ditches. Have those been monitored? Because I was thinking, I'm a builder, and when we work around any of the coastal dune lakes or the bay, we have the conservation buffers, we have wetlands setbacks, easements, and buffer zones, and exfiltration or stormwater requirements that we have to satisfy during construction, and also in the for the long-term use of the project and home. But you don't see. I know that there's other waterways, and I'm just thinking about South Walton County, and I know that most of the river is conservation land, and I don't know what's going on around, there's a lot of development around Freeport, but is all that land already developed to the point where there's no point in implementing something that would keep, or you give a filter strip for what's not really a waterway, and not showing up here, but has any thought or consideration been taken to address those in this?
So I can talk to several of the things that you just,
Sorry.
you brought up. So let's go back to mosquito control ditches.
Okay.
So mosquito control ditches, they are constructed for a purpose,
Yeah,
right?
sure.
To control mosquitoes. It's a process that is in place. There is a special district for it. For the South Walton component, we, as Walton County, also have a mosquito control department as well, but we don't have ditches. We maintain a part of that program. So South Walton Mosquito Control, they have a job to do. They're trying to keep everybody safe from health concerns associated with mosquitoes, and that's why at the end of the day, South Walton was, a lot of it was wet, and you gotta do something. There's
Yeah.
many areas in Florida that have mosquito control ditches and go through the same process. So we gotta think about what their purpose is
Sure,
and what they're used for.
important.
As for, are they a conveyance? Of course they are. I mean, just realistically. They are a ditch, whether they were, what their original and functional purpose is, they are still a conveyance because they are a ditch. The county has looked at opportunities, which we have a piece of property, it's 220 acres over in the Old Town Santa Rosa area, where we are proposing a project, we're going through the permitting phase right now, to capture 6 to 7 mosquito control ditches and be able to treat that water prior to being discharged out into the bay. So the county is trying to find ways that we can partner with the South Walton Mosquito Control, who has a mission, who has a purpose, who has the things that they have to check box. And then we're trying to help bring that all together and do some work that can also improve water quality as well. So there's a lot of moving parts that are going on, but we also have to think about what each entity's purpose and mission and what the roles are of those particular infrastructure as well.
Yeah, I don't want Zika virus. I'm not saying that. I'm just, it's just, but
Yes.
but it's like, it seems like kind of a blind spot. Or I know it's not a blind spot, but like in the way that it is considered and in the planning.
It is.
The planning department at least, it's not treated with the same regard that other waterways and body conservation areas are.
Right.
I think that's all I have to say.
I do have a couple questions, but I am noticing it's 2:20 and I want to be respectful of everyone's time. Is it okay if I ask? Okay, awesome.
We're scheduled until 3.
Oh, okay, wonderful. First off, I just want to say thank you for the work that you did. Seeing this presentation was really cool to see how these restoration projects could impact the nutrients in those several different situations, and these models are awesome. Just a really cool way to look at the data that I think has been needed here with all the data that we do have. I did want to ask, I might have missed it in the presentation or maybe it's in the report. I didn't see the potential impact that paving the unpaved roads would have. I noticed it for the other types, but I didn't see it for the
Yeah,
paved roads.
I think I just showed for now the loading side, this one.
Yeah.
So I do show where there's priorities, and I did show here I think I did show it, it was on the sediment map here, I did show a reduction. Here, so there is a sediment reduction, and I just picked one. And so, but I did not show in this presentation the exact reduction of something, and I think that's what I was talking with Linda earlier. We're gonna try to find a project here to try to show a pre-post analysis of we have what's called the grape light. I don't know if you're familiar with that, but that's essentially a sediment transport model that's used for roadways in Pacific. And so what we're gonna do is try to pick a handful and then show, like, if we could drop a couple here, we're gonna do like capture point downstream and do a pre-post and kind of have a nice graphic that would demonstrate that benefit. But for now, all I can just tell you is that the high priority is here, and I know that Melinda has, you're paving, hundreds of miles a year, and so the goal is to just do it here, and then you're gonna get benefits, because that's the amount of kilogram, that's actually coming out of there. So any road paving here is gonna reduce that number by something, and you want to do it there versus other ways, and that's kind of the big takeaway from that.
Okay.
But we do want to plan to do an example if we can find a stretch, and we'll actually design a little, we won't design it, but we'll come up with something a little bit more than what you're seeing here. Yeah.
Cool. I look forward to seeing that, and also the modeling for the green infrastructure. That's going to be really cool to see the potential impact of that. And then my second question is about the bacteria map we had at the very end. This kind of relates to the question I had earlier about the scope of the data that you used. Again, so I know we're obviously focusing on Walton County. Was bacteria data included in that map, or is it just, you know, is nothing popping up because Okaloosa County, you know, data wasn't used? I know Enterococcus is used as a bacteria indicator in more marine types of water, so I'm wondering maybe it's because that's what they're using in that area.
Well, because you asked, I will provide. I didn't show it because it was starting to get to be a lot of maps, and so I do have here. We did do both, and so, and I'll just show you those right here. So we do have, because we know we have the freshwater, which is E. coli, and then Enterococci is the marine side. So we do have both, and we do have sampling data in both areas, both bay and the tributaries, and so we are using both. And it just depends on the water quality standard. So the bay is using one, and the estuaries are using others, and the streams are using others. So it just depends. And we did do some salinity analysis to find out which was the threshold breakthrough, and so that was based on EPA as well. So we have all the historical records, and we sampled. And I'm kind of getting mixed up. You're mixing up the two questions here for a second. But we did sample where historical EPA and other agencies were sampling. So we did sample with our project as well as collecting historical data. And then our model does both as well. So that's your question, is are we using both parameters and then we include outside information? Yes, we use outside information, and we are sampling and modeling for both parameters.
Yeah, and so that would have been reflected on that map if there was high density in, you know, that Okaloosa side of the bay there.
Yes, because
and there just isn't, based on all of those criteria you mentioned.
Because our model is you know, watershed wide. So we don't cut off at the county boundary. We have it's kind of hard to see, but this is actually the model result. So you can see our model is spilling out over here. I didn't show it all, but it does. It is inclusive. The only difference that I started off in the very beginning, we cut the model down into smaller pieces inside the watershed, and then outside the watershed or outside the county, it gets bigger and it's more abstract, and so the resolution is a little bit lower. But we bring it in the boundary conditions from other studies and other data, and try to match it up as best we can.
Thank you.
We got one from everybody else. Well, it was good, even though it was 4 of you. I thought it was very productive, actually. So I appreciate the commentary.
7 people online, which is fantastic. We really appreciate your participation in viewing this. Hopefully other people will be able to view it as well. So.
And they could provide comments in writing online.
Absolutely. So if anybody's online who is not able to be here in person, please feel free to provide me any comments or questions via email. My email address, it's recently changed, so it's Melinda, MELINDA .Gates, GATES @mywaltonfl.gov. Yes.
So that's different now?
Our emails have just recently changed. However, the co.walton.fl.us still flows to our email, so just, yes.
Okay, so we'll
At
have
least
to
for now.
correct that.
So,
The phone number is still correct, all right?
That
That's
is
the state-
correct,
Okay, so
yes.
that's the Public Works number,
yes,
right? Yeah.
which is 850-892-8108. So feel free to either call me or email me.
Okay.
And Melinda, just as far as the commentary, some of the comments that came in during the presentation and all that, all very helps. It just kind of provides us opportunity to discuss things along the way. But the input that we get, we'll turn around and provide a response to that, just like we did in June, and that'll be incorporated into the plan. The whole idea being is that truly getting public input really helps as far as the different avenues and things that are seen, and that gets pulled into our plan, and that's what we'll be submitting in December, middle of December, and then we will meet on that, look for commentary from the county and the Corps as appropriate, and then we'll finalize the plan.
Perfect. Okay, so just to reiterate though, we do need to cut off comments probably by October 31st. That is 3 weeks from today, just to make sure that we can incorporate all those comments. As I said this over online where people are going to be watching, please get them to me by the 31st of October of 2024. Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, well, that will end our comment, right? So, excellent, thank you so much.
I did not get your new email. I might as well write it in.
Yes.
What is it? Should we fix it?
Do you want to